The reason my mum, who was white, moved to Toxteth was because I remember one day when we were in the post office and a woman spat on the floor and called my mother an N-lover, and I think people know what that means. So we moved to Toxteth straight away. It was a bit like a sort of a Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, but not quite as wealthy.
What I liked about Toxteth was the community for one, just the different people that you meet. Like it's like a proper true reflection of the world, like the different people that you meet from different countries, just different cultures and stuff like that.
I remember walking down Granby Street and you'd have, you know, like Danny's, and you had the music shop, so you would walk down Granby Street and there would just be music and, you know, people just outside, and by the time I would get from one end of Granby Street to the top end of Princess Road, I'd be rich. I'd be like 4 or 5 with all this change in my pocket, because there was loads of people just who would just be like, oh, look, this little girl, you know, how's your mum? Or, you know, someone always knew your mum in some way. So Toxteth for me growing up was just a beautiful place. It was like a country in itself.
Being able to see like a large black community right the way along on both sides of Granby Street, the little gangs that we used to have and stuff like that. So yeah, it was like a pleasant experience living in and around like the area at that time.
We danced, feet tapping the ground, danced, feet stamping on ground down in towns. We towered over tyrants by crowding together to create one body to pound our message that we won't tolerate it now.
In 1981, what it will show you in the media is that the Rialto building was burnt down and there was fighting against the police on Upper Parliament Street primarily. And that's because that's where the TV cameras could get to. Actually, the estate I came from was where most of the skirmishes against the police took place. So our estate was where the women's hospital is now, and that whole estate was shut down after the riots. It was different from what you see. It was very much sort of guerrilla warfare in a sense. It was small 5-on-5 sort of things. Sometimes the police would jump out of the Black Maria vans and have a quick exchange with some teenage lads who had bricks, and some of them had you know, petrol bombs and things like that.
Of course, I was a kid during the Toxteth riots of 1981, and I witnessed that firsthand. The city at that time was deemed by Margaret Thatcher to be best served by being put into a state of what she called, quote-unquote, managed decline. I think it was Michael Heseltine, who was one of her ministers at the time, who said, hang on, there's some potential here in the city, we can maybe turn it round and we'll try and find some different ways to get investment and bring tourism and so on. But much of that investment did flow in, and that's what's really turned Liverpool around today. So the Toxteth riots were instrumental in making that happen. The unfortunate reality was that the black community were not really involved in the development themselves, were not really beneficiaries of it, and the development of the black area was probably a combination of us being the last in line, and when we did finally get some development in Toxteth, particularly in the areas where the black people were concentrated, it was through a process of gentrification.
Tired of waiting around, we rounded up any pedestrian, found our fingers to tapping BBM systems, pinging, poking mobile phones in our hands, soaking in the information. Mark Duggan was shot, and the trigger that trickled down created uprisings to erupt, volcanic manic panic that demanded answers.
Okay, so I was in Birmingham when the riots just kicked off, and I remember like I'm just going to different cousins' houses and everybody talking about it. And I remember Blackberries being a super big thing then, and I was at like one of my cousins' houses, and then literally everybody was just getting messages. Nando's has been gone, JD's been gone, Size is gone, this shop's gone, that shop's gone. And then that same night we was travelling from Birmingham back to the area and going through Birmingham, just seeing police stations just on fire, like different police stations just all crispy and ashy. And then when we got back into the city, the whole of the avenue, just different cars just set on fire.
From my perspective, the 2011 uprisings that happened because Mark Zuckerman was shot by a police officer. So I felt that the black community were justified in their anger and justified in their frustration and the feelings that black people were disposable and could be, you know, shot by police officers who arguably attempted to cover it up, you know, by saying that he had a gun in his hands and then they couldn't place the gun. There was a lot going on which made people feel quite frustrated, particularly in the experiences of black people on the day-to-day. So I could understand why the uprisings happened. I could understand those feelings of frustration. But on the flip side, I was also feeling frustrated because I knew that most people, you know, the general public wouldn't understand why that was happening, and they would just see violence and they would just see, you know, lawless black people, and they would just kind of group us as they do as just, you know, people taken to the street because they want to with no real, you know, reason to, just setting cars on fire and behaving in a lawless manner. And that's quite often the word used to describe any time that black people, you know, fight back against oppression.
I watched that unfold as well because I was looking for my son, who was by Lawrence Road at the time. Went to Lawrence Road, there was a car burning in the middle of the street. There were adults on the doorsteps, which I was devastated by, laughing about what was going on, and I just felt that was very immature. If it's that serious that people are rising up against the authorities and the system, these aren't really laughing matters as far as I'm concerned.
Unanswered, anxious adolescents and young adults' angst turned to anger, and the acrid smell of burning tires rose high to hit the night skies. It smelled like teen spirit. And we reached enlightenment by lighting up our scenes. See, this hell seemingly became our nirvana, armed with petrol bombs as the summer simmered streets like saunas. Heat was brought and the cause became distorted. How did order become disordered? Let's analyze the explosive commotions that promoted these motives so that we reach a sort of diagnosis.
Community activism is strong, but there's no unification with that, I believe. I might be totally wrong, but like, you know, again, I come from an era where there was the Black Caucus and, you know, there was like all groups and they was all trying to work together and, you know, try and move us along as opposed to, you know, their individual cause or whatever. Like all causes was one cause.
See, they never like it when the community gets too close together. So there was a plan to break up the internal group cohesiveness of the black community in the post-Windrush generation, and what they did was used housing policy to do it. So they basically took all the black seamen who owned their own houses, forced them to sell their houses to the council under compulsory purchase, and then dispersed us widely across the city. And that really destroyed the fabric, if you like, of the black community. And then shortly thereafter, we all sort of found our way back to Toxteth after years of being in all the outlying communities.
Say by the time I got there, we're talking the 90s. So the feelings I came across was the feelings of poverty and inequality, and using the arts that I'd trained in as means of expression. I was lucky enough to meet people who were talking about sheroes and heroes. We had the Mandela struggle going on, which was very, very prevalent to everybody's struggle in that area.
One of the first activists that was brought to my attention was Leroy Cooper. He was the person who was pulled over by the police, which triggered the uprising in Toxteth. But it wasn't so much anything to do with what happened there and then. After it all calmed down, Leroy went round and painted all the street signs in red, yellow and green within what they used to call the Granby Triangle in those days. So that was, to me, that was the first piece of public visual art that was meaningful. I would say also there was a man called Paul Agoro, who sadly passed about 2.5 years ago. And he lived off Granby Street on Corridor Street with his partner Anna, and they created what they called the Blackboards Project. So the whole ethos behind the Blackboards Project was to put up murals on the doors and windows to stop people breaking in and messing with it. And this was like what they called the Black Heroes and Sheroes Project.
We know that fires begin with ignition. The process is a complex chain-like system that creates flames that flicker, meaning you need fuel. And it has been shown the government budget cuts are known to be particularly potent in fueling protests. That's austerity. And August's bones poked through its thin skin, hollow and starved, fed up of eating sorrows and broken promised tomorrows. And so the fires were set. History shows the downtrodden uprise when cries for help fall on deaf ears. But like all fires, entropy took a hold. Lights of hope turned to fires and smoke, turned to broken glass and ashes, turned to burning cars and laughter. As people reveled in their madness, I wrestled with fear and sadness at what the aftermath would bring. But as the light cooled down, as the fires began to shrink, began to die, I saw a warm orange glow begin to grow, to come alive. As the same mobile phones were used to mobilize, fingers to tapping, hashtag riot cleanup.
Granby, to all intents and purposes, from when I remember it and to what it is now, is a desolate wasteland as such. I know there's like houses on there, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the spirit of community. It's desolate, which is a shame, and I guess maybe everything can't last forever. So, like, I think when Granby started to disappear, a lot of the community started to disappear with it.
Yeah, I think civil unrest is basically a symptom of society. So I know in the UK we seem to riot or uprise like clockwork every 10 years. It usually coincides with a Tory government. It usually coincides with an oppressive press that ignore the experiences of, you know, in this case, black people. And it usually coincides with times of economic and social strife. And these are all things that are often felt more powerfully by the black community. So there, you know, if we use the iceberg model, that's what's going on underneath the water. So quite often communities will be targeted by the police, we'll be taking away our community centres, our youth centres, it's hard to get a job, and the media are portraying us in a certain way. And then there'll be, you know, whatever the event happens to be at the time, that kind of thing that lights the fire, whether it be someone being arrested unfairly, whether it be seeing a black person shot and killed by the police and then seeing them attempt to cover it up. Something will ignite that resistance and that sense of no, this, we've had enough, no more. So if you look at any uprising, whether it be the L8 uprising of 1981, whether it be the uprisings of 2011, or whether it be the BLM movement that happened last year, there's usually a reason, there's usually a strength of feeling, and there's usually black trauma that is underlying those events. And it's not just a case of people going on the street because they want something for free and they want to cause a little bit of trouble. It's actually the complete opposite. It's people taking to the street and saying, listen, our communities are in pain and you need to see this.
And we danced. Feet tapping the ground, danced. Feet stepping on ground, down. Feet stepping on ground. We banded together, lending a hand to create one body to rebuild the wreckage and set us forth to a better present between hell and heaven's doors.